a part of this panel. I just want to recognize the other panelists and of course recognize the organizers of our event this afternoon, and also recognize this territory that we're in, you know, and the traditional people of this territory. So resistance, you know. So resistance. I did, but I left it on my list anyway. Let's see a show of hands. How many of y'all get overwhelmed when you hear? Not yet. I'll give you a cue when I can see your hands. But how many of y'all get overwhelmed when you hear about the global triple crisis? When you hear about the end of the era of cheap energy, which will impact every segment of our society. It already is. I mean, I know every single one of you, especially people with big families, are feeling it at the grocery store. I know I did yesterday when I was at Superstore. How many of you get overwhelmed and just kind of feel overwhelmed when you hear about the loss of natural capital to sustain this economic paradigm, this insanity called capitalism, you know, the total collapse of ecosystems all across Mother Earth? And how many of you get overwhelmed when you hear about, 60 18-wheelers getting thrown around in Dallas, Texas, like little toys, and this whole notion of catastrophic climate destabilization, which of course is attributed to our economic paradigm. So let's see a show of hands. How many of y'all get overwhelmed by that? Yeah. Well, I get overwhelmed by it too. You know, it needs to be a big issue for me. Of course, I'm a young guy still, you know. I'll be 35 this summer, so I still like to think of myself as pretty young. Of course, though, I'm a father now too, and I run an international campaign, so I do have some responsibilities and some experience. And in that limited experience and responsibilities that I carry, I've faced apathy. I've faced getting overwhelmed, and I think that's definitely a reality that we're faced right now as social movements try to find ways to facilitate convergence here in Canada to overcome this government's agenda. And I guess, for me, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is both a kind of a philosophical example of how we can resist and have success with that, but also some real tangible stuff. But I wanted to start first with kind of the up in the air, example. And it's a story that I heard a long time ago from, I don't even remember who told me, but anyway, it's a story about the fact that, everybody's always tripping out about these global problems and how do we, globalize justice in the interest of localizing power. And a lot of times I find that, my comrades in the movement, they tend to take on a little bit too much, The shoulders start to come forward a little bit, and posture starts to get like this, and, get a sore back, and, you start feeling it. It starts to wear you down. Health problems set in, all that stuff, right? And for me, one of the things that really helped me out was just this little analogy about the difference between a blue whale and a school of sardines. Now, some of you might have heard this, there's a lot of people who heard stories before in the audience, but quite often I find that activists out there, will look at the movement and look at these global problems that we got to overcome, kind of like a blue whale. Now, at any given time when a blue whale, the largest living creature ever to grace the sacredness of Mother Earth, is swimming through the ocean, it takes approximately 10 kilometers for that whale to do a 180-degree turn. And there's a tremendous amount of mass and force and energy that goes into that. I mean, the beating heart of a blue whale is like the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. All right, just to give you some idea. You can swim through its arteries. That's how big its arteries are. A human being could fit in them. And I find that a lot of people tend to think about change in that way, as one solid object that they got to turn around 180 degrees, and they get overwhelmed, and they give up, they become apathetic, and then they don't go vote, and then you got Harper, elected with a Conservative majority by 21.7% of the voting public in Canada. Well, I'm here to tell you that a school of sardines in the ocean is about the same total size of mass as a blue whale, right? And it's a beautiful thing to watch. And it's just moving. And at any given time when a school of sardines is swimming, there's always about 4 to 5% of that school of fish that's swimming the exact opposite direction. Now, for those of you that have taken science, you know what that creates friction, right? And so, over time, as that school of sardines swimming this way, and there's a couple swimming that way, 4 or 5%, the friction grows. And that causes the percentage of sardines, just, you know, that are swimming this way, to start swimming this way. And that percentage jumps to 10%, to 11%, to 12%, to 13%. And when it gets to about 14 or 15%, the friction becomes so great, there's an instantaneous shift 180 degrees. And then the whole process starts over again. And that's how we got to think about social movements, whether it's the labor movement or, you know, women's rights movement, two-spirited rights movement, or indigenous rights movement, student movement. We got to think about it like a school of sardines and not like a blue whale. And really, we don't have the responsibility to change every single person in society's mind. We only have to create enough friction until there is enough critical mass that we achieve the friction necessary for systemic change that we seek. It's really important to just think about that. Take that home with you. And the reason I share that with you is because me, to be perfectly honest, and this might trigger some of y'all from the labor movement, but I, quite frankly, with the work that I do, fighting against the tar sands, the most destructive development on the face of the earth, I don't give a shit about NASCAR dads and soccer moms, you know? Because for the most part, NASCAR dads and soccer moms are God-fearing, tax-paying, law-abiding citizens. And whether they like it or not, they will follow those laws that exist, all right? And so what I focus on, rather than trying to change the minds of people who are very comfortable where they're at, and who are God-fearing, tax-paying, law-abiding citizens, I focus on organizing in the communities and the bases where their struggle, their liberation, their freedom, their happiness, their quality of life is tied in with mine, and work with them collectively together to expand a political base of resistance to achieve some objectives that we can achieve collectively together if we just put our minds and our hearts together to decide upon a future that'll, you know, be proper for our children, and also everything else that lives in this sacred cycle of life that we have a responsibility to defend. Of course, I'm speaking about the rights of Mother Earth. And so, you know, for us, and our timekeeper's doing an awesome job. I'll just wrap it up with this last piece here. You know, for those of you that were at the rally earlier, I was one of the speakers, and I really appreciated that. That was a big honor. But I talked about an example, and I'll bring it up here again. You know, there's this little tiny First Nation in Northern Ontario called KI. How many of y'all heard of KI? Quite a good section of you. Now, the real name is Kissasunupichingan. I'm not going to get forgive me, I cannot pronounce it, and I will not do it any justice to try. But it's a small Cree community up in Northern Ontario, you know, really a village by any other standards. And this community, you know, they have a chief and council, you know, 6 councillors, 1 chief. And they stood up. You know, the people told their chief and council, who they elected to protect their rights, their collective rights. They told them to stand up against mining companies who were coming in without their permission and searching out for precious mineral resources in their territory. And those developments, if they were allowed to happen, would destroy the ability for that community to hunt, fish, and trap, which in this country are constitutionally enshrined and protected rights for Native people. All right? And so the chief and council engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience. Those planes, when they came in to land on their small little lake up there in Northern Ontario, in the area called the Ring of Fire, chief went out in his own boat, and he got right in front of those planes, and he did not let them land. Right? Now what happened was very dramatic, because they went to court, they got charged, and they got put in jail for 6 months.
Oh my God.
Democratically elected chief and council, they got put in jail for 6 months for doing just what they were elected to do. But I will say this, they appealed. and it went up to the higher courts. And in the end, the courts ruled in their favor because they were right. They had a sound case, and there was injustice that was occurring. And they broke unjust laws so that the laws would sway in their favor. And now 2 years later, the McGuinty government ruled that they have permanent protection and all mining is banned in their traditional territory.
Right.
And I'm going to conclude with this because it's so very important. You know, we have to understand that this government is not even really a government. All roads at this point now lead to the PMO, where we were standing and protesting earlier. All methods of accountability, of transparency, of oversight are being eroded, ripped out, torn to shit. And just like this government and subsequent governments before it have been attacking the collective rights of Indigenous peoples in this country, the first peoples of this land, they're also doing the same to big labor. And they're doing it to just about every other group as well. And so we have to, you know, facilitate this convergence. We have a tremendous responsibility on our shoulders to create, empower, inspire the most radical and largest social movement ever in the history of mankind, not just for Canada, but globally.
Hear, hear.
And the only way that we're going to have success by doing that is by educating ourselves about history, getting politicized. I agree with the points that were made about training, but also about diversifying our tactics, embracing methods of nonviolent civil disobedience. I mean, all those lessons are there. For those of you, some of you older folks, you probably went through this 2 or 3. It's cyclical, it's not linear, it's a cyclical thing. And a true revolutionary is someone who discovers a negative cycle in that cyclical point of time. He gets rid of it and replaces it with something that's positive for the people. That's a revolutionary. Okay? And so, you know, in conclusion, I'll just say that it's a real pleasure to be here. We have a lot of work to do for true success in our collective struggle. We have to understand that our movement must be rooted profoundly and deeply in an anti-colonial, an anti-racist, and anti-oppression framework. Because far too often, big coalitions and coming together, they get torn apart by race, class, gender, by sexuality, discrimination, by all kinds of different discriminations. Now, I'm not saying we got to solve racism, but we do have to develop the mechanisms to confront these divisive tactics in a healthy way so that they don't stop our inertia moving forward and our ability to expand our political base of resistance. So with that, please join our IEN Facebook page. Please follow me on Twitter, Clayton IEN. Follow our main IEN Twitter, and feel free to contact me anytime. We've got a tremendous amount of resources we can recommend for training and that sort of thing, and it's a real pleasure to be here.